All right. Good morning and welcome to another episode of the Liberty Dad Podcast, a discussion on politics and culture. I'm your host, DL, America's most objective libertarian. If you're tuning in live, thank you so much for giving me your time so early. Remember, folks, you're a candidate running for office or you know one, and you would like an opportunity to be on the show, then head on over to candidates.libertydad.com and get yourself booked. The link is in the show notes. Available times are Tuesday and Thursday mornings at 7:30 a.m., Wednesday and Thursday evenings at 7:30 p.m. All times are Eastern. Speaking of candidates, Tuesday, tomorrow, 7:30 a.m., I will be joined by Steve Feldman, who is running for U.S. House out of North Carolina, the 10th District. And then Wednesday night, 7:30 p.m., I will have Reese Wood for Janesville City Council out of Wisconsin. Thursday morning at 7:30 a.m., Andrew Underwood, who is running for U.S. House, Georgia's 14th District, will be joining me. And then that evening, Thursday, 7:30 p.m., Alan Buckley for U.S. Senate out of Georgia. And then next week, I got 4 more new people. So this is pretty awesome. We are running full steam ahead with candidates here on the Liberty Dad Show. So again, if you are a candidate, and look, my heart is with the libertarian candidates, but if you're a Republican or a Democrat candidate, you're more than welcome to sign up too. I'll give you the same fair treatment. Anyway, that's what I got for announcements real quick. All right, what do we got for today? Well, back in episode 617, I did a bill review on Florida's property tax bills. There were 13 of them that were floating through the House, and I think a couple in the Senate as well. I discussed the reality of whether or not they were going to eliminate property tax in Florida. None of them did. All of them would just simply reduce it in one way or another. Well, we're back because there's been an update and we need to discuss. So before we do that, before we get into it, let's go and check out what the media is saying. And I think I've got this all. Yeah, I forgot to double check one thing, but we'll see if this all is a go here. Here we go.
Tallahassee House Republicans passed their plan to give voters the choice to get rid of homestead property taxes that don't fund schools. Their proposed ballot amendment also locks in minimum funding for law enforcement and public safety. West News' Justin Shecker spoke with the Seminole County tax collector. He joins us live from his office in Altamont Springs. Justin.
Well, like the Democrats in the legislature, Stu, this county's Republican tax collector wonders how counties and cities would make up for a major loss in revenue. The Republican House Speaker says the resolution approved today could set the stage for historic property tax reform.
80 yeas, 30 nays, Mr. Speaker.
Show the bill passes.
The Florida House, along party lines, passed a resolution Thursday that could give Floridians a major property tax break.
This may well be the most aggressive legislation ever passed
by a legislative chamber on property taxes in the history of the United States.
Woo! We should be excited, right? Like this is the most aggressive? We'll find out. We'll find out.
For months, Governor Ron DeSantis has called for the complete elimination, but the House resolution preserves homestead property taxes that fund public schools.
Oh.
Our actions today are not sudden, nor do they meet any reasonable definition of the word quick.
The Florida Senate still needs to approve the proposal before a constitutional amendment would appear on the November ballot.
We are here to address putting money back into people's pockets. We are also giving.
So I just want to, when I hear about legislation that was related to taxes, I don't ever want to hear the words, we're going to put money back into the pockets. Because if you're putting it back into the pockets, two things. Number one, you took it in the first place. So if you're putting it back, why'd you take it? Number two, you're unlikely to be putting back as much as you took because there was a cost involved in taking it in the first place. Somebody had to draft legislation if that was necessary. Somebody had to enforce it. Somebody had to review it. There's somebody in the pipeline somewhere when you're taking money from taxpayers. And so therefore you can't possibly give back everything that you took. And as a taxpayer, I want you to stop taking the taxes in the first place, right? All taxation is theft. But if you want to make my argument more difficult to make, then at least take only that which you absolutely need to run the city or the state or whoever is taking it.
Our people a choice.
According to the state's own estimate, the elimination of non-school property taxes would result in local governments losing $18.3 billion in annual revenue. Orange County could be down more than $1 billion, while the projection for Seminole County is $328 million.
Where they get the money from, if they don't collect it from property tax, is a mystery.
Oh, it's a mystery, huh? So they haven't figured out what they're going to see. This is part of the problem. Whenever we talk about tax reduction, what ends up happening is they'll say, well, we're going to put money back into your pockets, which means they're just going to give you back a portion of what they took in the first place. The second thing that's a problem is we don't talk about, hey, here's how we're reducing our spending so that we don't have to turn around and take it back later again or raise a tax elsewhere. This is a huge problem. You cannot talk about reducing taxes, whether it's not taking it in the first place, that's the most preferable path, or if it's even, we'll give it back to you, without also talking about, here's how we're going to reduce our spending bill so that we don't need that tax money in the first place. Keep that in mind, folks, when we're having these conversations. You cannot have one without the other. Otherwise, it's just going to be made up elsewhere.
Seminole tax collector J.R. Kroll says counties and cities might need to increase sales tax rates to pay for police, fire, and other services.
And say, well, we'll do it at a sales tax. I go, well, in a recession or something like COVID happens, what happens when you don't get the money in because people drop off?
Well, that's a good question. What happens during a COVID situation where people aren't going out and buying things? They're not paying the sales tax because they're stuck at home for however many months. Where do you get your money? That's a lot of money that doesn't come in. This is why we have to talk about spending reductions. I'm going to hammer on this over and over and over because spending is directly tied to tax revenue.
Orlando's Democratic State Rep Anna Escamani says she worries wealthier Floridians would benefit the most.
What it's likely going to do is shift the burden of taxation to renters, who arguably are the folks who are struggling to achieve the American dream of home ownership.
And Governor Ron DeSantis says he's working with the Florida Senate on a property tax proposal for this year's ballot. He also wrote on X, quote, given that it can't be voted on by the people before November, it's better to do it right than do it quick. We're live in Altamont Springs. I'm Justin.
All right. So I agree with Governor Ron DeSantis. It is better to do it right than to do it quick. We absolutely should do this right, which means we have to have a proper understanding of everything. We have to understand that if you're talking about reducing taxes, the government is spending that money somewhere. They're not just collecting taxes and hoarding it and like, yeah, we've got this big, huge Scrooge McDuck vault with all of your money that we've been taking in taxes. And turns out we could actually just stop taking tax money and we'll be fine because we got a pile of cash that we've been sitting on. That's not how it works, right? How it works is they use they use the tax money in their expenses. They spend it on something, somewhere, which means if they're not getting it, then they have to go elsewhere. If they're not getting it from Route A, they need to go to Route B. Now, before we discuss the changes in one particular bill, I wanted to kind of give you just a quick peek at where all 13 bills are at. So let me go ahead and pull this up here real quick, and we will get started and just take a look. So here we are. I'm just going to go through them. There's 13 of them, so I'm not going to go through all of them. And there's really only one that's important at this particular moment. So HJ House Joint Resolution 213, modification of limitations on property assessment increases. The last action was the 27th of last month, and it has 3 text versions. Now, I included the text versions along with the last action just to kind of illustrate that the movement is very low on almost all of them. Okay, so this one had a little bit of movement, and we can see that relatively recently, it's only been 1 month since its last action. If you go to the website, to the Florida Senate website, and you look at it, you can see all the actions, like did they vote on it? Was there an amendment? Did they read it? Whatever, all these good things, right? So the last action was on the 27th of January, and there are 3 text versions. I think that's important because most of them have only 1 text version. And when there's only 1 text version, unless that text is very, very good and very appealing, then it likely needs to undergo modification. So you get amendments where somebody says, hey, you know what, let's change this language, let's clean this up, so on and so forth. So when I don't see additional text versions, what that tells me is this one is stalling. It's not moving. It's not likely to go forward. All right, that's why I added this information in there. Senate Bill 286, assessment of changes, additions, or improvements to homestead properties, 113. This is where most of them end. Most of them have a last action date of 113 and 1 text version. So this bill right here, I don't expect it to go anywhere. What else we got? Senate Joint Resolution 282, limitation on the assessed value of property owned and used for commercial purposes by small business, 113, last action, 1 text version. Probably not going anywhere. 278, limitation on the assessed value of new homestead property. Last action, 114. Might be 113. I might have made a typo there. But one way or another, it was the middle of January, and there's only 1 text version. Not going anywhere. 274, homestead property tax benefits for long-term owners. 113 and 1 text version. Likely not going anywhere. 270, homestead property exemption for persons age 65 or older. This was a terrible one. This was basically like, hey, if you're an old person, look, don't get me wrong. I'm going to be old. I'm getting old myself. But to justify legislation that only impacts people who are 65 or older, well, that's completely unfair treatment. You want to talk about taxation without representation there. All right, 113, 1 text version. Thankfully, this one isn't going anywhere. 215, ad valorem taxation. Last action, 113, text version, 1. Okay. Accrued, 211, accrued Save Our Homes property tax benefit for non-school property tax. Last action, 113, only 1 text version. 209, property insurance relief, homestead exemption, non-school property tax. You notice in the trend here, there's a lot of non-school property tax exemptions going on here. That'll come into play here in just a moment. This one had a last action date of 113, but it actually had 3 text versions. But 113, I'm like, yeah, you're not going anywhere. I mean, it's possible. Don't get me wrong. I'm not guaranteeing you that these bills won't move forward. My speculation is they won't. And remember, everything has to be like, these are bills that will put something on the ballot for Florida voters to vote upon. So that have to be through the House, through the Senate, and passed in both chambers in order for them to make it to the ballot here in November. Time's running short. 207, assessed home value, homestead exemption of non-school property tax. 113, one text version, not going anywhere. 205, elimination of non-school property tax for homesteads for persons age 65 and older. Another terrible bill. They're all terrible, but this one's particularly terrible just reading the headline or reading the title. Last action, 113, and one text version. 201, elimination of non-school property tax for homesteads. Last action, 113, text version 1. This one, keep this one in mind. This one, we'll talk about this more in a moment. 203, elimination of non-school property for homesteads. 219, so just relatively recent, earlier, just last month. And then 4 text versions. This is the one we're going to talk about today. So we're going to talk about 203, and we're going to kind of briefly mention 201 here in just a moment. But I'm giving you a lay of the land so that you know, hey, what's going on with all the bills, all 13 of them that were proposed or sponsored and in the House or a couple of them in the Senate. What's the status? All right. Oh, we don't want to go there for it. We don't want to read that just yet. All right. So that's all 13 of the bills. So I just wanted to let you know the status of them. So let's talk about HJR 203, House Joint Resolution 203. That one has the most movement. It's also the one that changed quite a bit. There are 4 different, if you look at the first one, it's vastly different from the 4th one. So what it originally would have done was leave the $25,000 school exemption in place while incrementally adding $100,000 exemption for non-school tax annually. Okay, so that means if your home's assessed value was $250,000, then you would expect to see full exemption from non-school property taxes within 3 years. Longer for more expensive homes. And by the way, just in case you were curious, I believe that I saw it just this morning that the median home value in Florida is about $400,000, and I think it's a little bit lower for the average. So I just did the math on $250,000, which would give you full exemption within 3 years. But if your home is worth $400,000, then it would be longer because it's only going to give you, it would only have given you $100,000 every single year additional exemption. And again, that's only from non-school property tax. So your school tax exemption, you get the first $25,000, you get $25,000 exemption from school property tax. And then after that, you're paying school property tax. Well, this bill has had 2 major changes. The first one is for first responders. It prohibits local governments, counties and municipalities from reducing the total funding provided for services by law enforcement, firefighters, and other first responders. So, like, it includes all of them. So it's like, hey, if you're a firefighter, if you're any kind of first responder, and it has them defined in there, then the funding would be prohibited. Way back in episode 57, way back, literally back in 2021, I discussed HB 1, which was Florida's anti-riot legislation. That legislation gave state lawmakers a path to fight back against defunding attempts by cities. That was in response to the whole defund the police movement. And so in Florida, we passed legislation that it basically said, hey, if you reduce this was specifically for, I believe, for law enforcement. If you reduce funding for law enforcement in this state, then I believe it did 2 things. Number one, it allowed somebody to report that to the state, and then the state could evaluate it and potentially push back. It also put the city on the hook. So if they reduced funding for law enforcement And then there was a riot at some point, and the police came back and said, hey, we had asked for additional funding. We got it turned down, or they reduced our funding. We were unable to, with this, this level of funding, to protect private property. It would open up the local legislators to civil liability. So that's what that bill did. But this bill, if passed, it would put into the Florida Constitution that any defunding attempts would be prohibited, because funding is tied now to the fiscal year 2025, 2026, or 2026, 2027 level, whichever one is higher. So it basically says, all right, one of these two fiscal years, whichever one has the higher funding, that's the one going forward that you have to provide at a bare minimum. Okay. But keep in mind, there still would be, like, if the police said, okay, well, we got our funding has remained the same, but we've asked for more funding and the city has denied it, there is still that civil liability in place from HB1 back in 2021. Just figured I'd throw that mention in there, because like I reviewed that bill and it's kind of relevant. So now the language, let's talk about the language of what that does. So let's go back to the quotes there. We're going to go here, and then hopefully you can read it. If not, don't worry, I'm going to read it to you. Here is the language, just so you see what it says. Prohibition of reductions in local first responder funding. Beginning with the 2027-2028 local fiscal year, the total funding provided by each local government for services provided by law enforcement, firefighters, and other first responders, as provided by general law, may not be less than such jurisdiction's total budgeted amount for such services in either the 2025 or 2026 local fiscal year, whichever was higher, notwithstanding any reduction in ad valorem revenue that may result from the amendment to Article 7 approved by voters on November 3rd, 2026. So that's the language specific to the first responders. So it basically just says, look, you're tied to this. You're tied to one of these 2 years, whichever one's higher. And that would be in our Constitution. Okay. So just pointing this out so you know, going on, the other change, this is the more significant change, is that HJ Res 203, it went from an incremental exemption for non-school taxes to a full exemption. So basically what that does is it splits between the current law has a $50,000 homestead exemption that splits between $25,000 for school tax exemption and $25,000 for non-school tax exemption. HJR 203 would leave the $25,000 school tax in place and extend the $25,000 for non-school tax to a 100% exemption starting January 1st, 2027. So it basically says, look, you're going to be fully exempt from anything that's not a school tax right away, right? Starting January next year. Now, what's interesting about all of this is that at least one bill has basically been voided. Remember, I told you to keep in mind HJR 201, elimination of non-school property tax for homesteads. That's because HJR 203, the bill that we're talking about now, the bill that's actually got some momentum, that bill is now doing what HJR 201 would have done. So out of the 13 bills, we can pretty much eliminate one of them entirely. It's still there. Technically, it could move forward. It's even more unlikely than the other 11. Now, I don't expect the other 11, am I doing that right? 11, 12, 13, yes. I don't expect the other 11 to make any movement. I just don't. We're already starting in March. We've got to have our ballots ready, right? Like we've got to get things prepared. We've got any finalization of the language. It also has to pass the Senate, because right now, HJR 203, it's not going to guaranteed be on the ballot. It's just the most likely one that will, because the House passed it with, I think it was a 60-40 vote. I think it was a 60-40 vote. The House passed it and then sent it on to the Senate. The Senate has it. The Senate has to pass it with 3/5 vote. once they pass it, they don't make any more changes that require any House review, then it will then be on our ballot. Okay? But it's not there yet. So we now have one that's pretty strong contender for being on the ballot, one that's pretty much not going to be on the ballot at all unless something major happens with it, and 11 more that are quite unlikely to make it. So that's where we are with the bills. Now, if any of the bills do, however many bills do end up on the ballot, they still require 60% voter support in order to pass, because this is a constitutional change. And I want you to remember that the 60% vote was partly the concern that I made in the last episode, episode 617, because if there were too many bills related to property tax, then none of them might get 60% of voter support, as people would be split on which one they preferred. So the ones that I was criticizing for being, only for those 65 and older, well, people that were 65 and older, they might choose to support that bill if it was on the ballot for them, whereas younger people might support 201, which would have removed it entirely. But keep in mind, none of the bills, not a single one, would have completely eliminated property tax. Okay? That is very important for you to know. But again, Florida has basically narrowed it down to probably one bill. It's not yet guaranteed. There may be hope for some of the others. This bill, again, is not guaranteed either, as it needs to pass the Senate. But in the end, just know, and I cannot emphasize this enough, it is not a full property tax repeal. Homeowners will still be on the hook for school taxes. And if you don't pay your taxes, you can still lose your home, which means all the talk about renting your home from government via taxes, that remains in place. Because even if the taxes are a little bit lower, they're still there, and the government will get theirs. So what's my take? Well, I oppose this bill. It's a nice start, but it fails to really make your home your home. You are still renting via school taxes. And there's no guarantee that the school taxes wouldn't go up. So and who knows where they could go. Like I believe here in Duval County, our school budget is larger than the county's budget, which is crazy. We should be like number one in the school for education, but we're not. Conversation for a different day. If it were just a regular piece of legislation, I might be willing to consider it as a first step, because it's less difficult, or it's more easy, however you want to phrase it, to change legislation than it is to change our Constitution. Our Florida Constitution requires 3/5 vote out of both the House and the Senate. So that's a pretty steep vote. It doesn't require just a simple majority. It requires 3/5 vote out of both chambers. And then on top of that, it requires 60% voter support. So that's a lot. And then if you really want to go there, it's still not a guarantee, because 60% of the voters, what was it, in 2020? I think it might have been 2021. I don't remember exactly which year, but it was a while back. We voted to give felons their right back to vote. So like once they've served their time, the voters voted on a piece of, on a constitutional change. I think it was a constitutional amendment. They voted with, it was like 64% or something like that. It was just over 60%. But they voted that if you're a felon and you finished your time, you would get your voting privileges back. And what did the Republicans do like within that same year, or within a year? What'd they do? They went out and they modified the language of the law to basically say, oh, well, okay, yeah, you can have your right to vote back, but you've got to pay for all these additional fees and blah, blah, blah. So they didn't change what the will of the voters entirely, but they did add a barrier that the voters had basically said, we don't want that barrier, but they added a barrier. They just basically took the barrier that existed and they increased it. And they're like, it's still a hurdle. It's just taller. That's all. That wasn't the spirit of what the voters asked for. So even still, it's not a guarantee that one party or the other may not screw things up on purpose. It's, it's too easy for this to potentially pass and then be the end of property tax elimination conversations. That is why I oppose this ultimately, because I'm looking at it, I'm saying, okay, if it's in the Constitution, because of the effort involved in making a constitutional amendment, I think it could too easily be like voters be like, yeah, we solved property taxes, hooray! And there have been some reports where they're like, they've ended property taxes in Florida. That is not true. Number one, it's not even out of the Senate yet, so it still has to pass the Senate. Then it has to pass the voters. Then we have to make sure that Republicans or Democrats don't fiddle with things and basically ruin it by making some legislative change, which they probably will. Because as you heard, there's going to be a shortfall in communities. They're going to be like, whoa, where are we getting this money from? I guess we're going to make sales tax. Maybe that'll do it. Maybe they'll increase the school tax and then they'll take some of that money for, I don't know. I'm not sure how they will respond. But I can tell you this, until we deal with the spending, it will always be a looming cloud over the head of taxpayers. It will always. The other reason that I'm not a big fan of this bill, but I could tolerate it, is this only would apply for homes that are homestead, which means it's a home that you live in. So if you are somebody, let's say you're a mom and pop and you own your home, right? You live in the home that you've paid for, but you've also bought some other homes that you've got as rental properties. Those properties would not be subject to this legislation. So they would get the full brunt of all the taxes. And not only could they raise school taxes, but they could raise other taxes on non-homesteaded properties, which means it could ultimately cause rents to go up. It could cause a lot of your mom and pop folks who have, 1 to say 9 properties. It could cause them to have to sell their properties because perhaps they start struggling to get renters in to be able to pay their bill, pay the mortgage and the taxes. Sorry, I meant mostly the taxes. But it may cause the cost to go up to the point where a lot of people just simply say, I can't afford to own this second, third, fourth, whatever property. And then who do they sell it to? Well, if you're worried about the BlackRocks of the world, potentially corporate buyers, right? So it's hard to say. We could speculate all day long, but ultimately I see that there are a lot of problems, and it is explicitly tied to the fact that we're not yet addressing spending. We need to address spending. Now, we're making some strides here in Florida. We do have Doge, which I can't remember. There's a Florida Doge. I think they call it FAFO, the Fiscal Accountability something office, something like that. I can't remember. They did the FAFO, right? I get it, whatever. Our legislators are trying to pretend that they're still cool. They're not. Like once you get old enough, you're just not cool if you ever were. Whatever. Anyway, that's my show, folks. That's what I got. Let's check out the comments here. Happy Monday, folks. Keith says, yes, sir. Happy Monday to you. Johnny Mac from CNY or CNY, Johnny Mac CNY. So I assume that's New York. I'm not sure. 666, number of the beast, fitting for ending property taxes. Maybe. Depends. Yeah, I was a little like, I saw it. I was like, ooh, episode 666. Luckily, I'm not really into that kind of, I don't go, oh my God, 666. Remember back in the day, you would go to the Taco Bell, and your order would be like $6.66, and you'd be like, whoa, I better add a taco. Yeah, I don't do that anymore, but I looked at it and I was like, interesting number, but I don't have anything to tie it in. But anyway, I appreciate you noticing the 666 there, and hopefully this information and others who are putting it out there will let the voters know that this particular piece of legislation is not enough. It's not good enough. We want something that ends property taxes in full. Now, from the libertarian perspective, the most ideal situation would be ending property taxes on all property. Your homesteaded property, the properties that you rent out, Your commercial properties, all of it. That's just that's unlikely to ever happen. Okay. And the large reason why is spending. You want to get there, deal with the spending. And you need to deal with the spending first. Because if you don't deal with the spending first, then what happens is you set yourself up for legislators around the state to say, we need to have this money. We can't let this thing go, without money, whatever this thing is. Therefore, we're going to have to implement this tax in some way. Maybe they'll offer a gas tax. Maybe they'll increase the school tax. Maybe they'll increase, the non-school taxes on the homes that, aren't homesteaded. Maybe they'll skyrocket. Who knows? Maybe it's sales tax. Governments are good at finding ways to tax people. So without addressing the spending, this is not a good bill. It's a good start. That is it. All right, folks. That's my show. Very short today. 36 minutes? Yeah. They're about 36 minutes. That's not bad. I did pretty good. I'm going to try this more often. Anyway, come back by later. Let me know what you think in the show notes, in the comments. Drop a comment in. It helps out the algorithm. I read the comments and, sometimes I respond to them. Sometimes I'm like, oh, that's a good point. You could have made it more nicely, but whatever. It's a good point. And sometimes I fire back and sometimes I talk about them on the show. So drop me a note later on, help a brother out. But with that being said, I'm out for today. Have a good one. I'll see you tomorrow. You know that I'm all about supporting organizations that hold my values. Make sure you head on over to blackgunsmatter.shop. They've got apparel, stickers, and more. Use the code LibertyDad, all one word, at checkout to score a 10% discount. Or just hit the referral link in the show notes. That'll make it so much easier. Remember, I'm not just a voice on a mic. I'm a dad who's working hard to deliver to you the best libertarian content. Connect with me on Linktree, where you'll find links to my Patreon and Buy Me a Coffee, because every bit helps keep this show rolling. Plus, you can find me on my other platforms to stay in the loop. With your help, this show, The Message of Liberty, will be seen and heard by more people.